Restaurant Unstoppable. Inspire, empower, and transform the industry.
Noma had just, for the first time, been recognized as the world's best restaurants, the first of its four times, right? And I said, you know what? I want to figure out first what made Noma so special. What positioned it to go from a restaurant that I think started in 2004 to being the world's best restaurant in 6 years. Okay, how does that happen? It's a 40-seat restaurant. How does that happen, right? And I'm like, I'm going to spend a couple hours on this. I'm going to figure this all out.
Yeah.
Right. And that
10 years later.
Yeah, that was me sitting in my office with, we had almost 1,500 employees in the Philippines. I had an office of 50 people outside my door, and I'm sitting in my office every day looking at Noma, right? Trying to figure out what's going on.
So you said up to this point, at this point, you haven't cracked the Noma code. You're still curious about what that is, but you did ask a lot of questions and you got a lot of varying answers that today aren't the right answers. What are a lot of those answers you got that you can debunk as not necessarily truth?
So there are 3 levels, more or less, of knowledge. Okay, and for those who are listening that are restaurant owners, for example, right? If you are asking yourself a question about how something works, and the answer you are giving yourself, or that everybody in your team is giving you, are tactical answers, right? Which is basically, a tactic is something that really has just one action step to it, right? It's not universal.
Yeah.
Okay. And unfortunately, in the restaurant industry, many people don't get beyond tactical answers. Now, there's a layer 2, which is strategic. Okay. I want to be able to bring in more people into my restaurant, right? What is the strategy that I would use, right? And so let me give you an example of the tactic first.
Yeah,
so we can tighten this up,
yeah.
right? So a tactic might be, I want my sign to stand out, so I'm going to put up high on a pole.
Okay.
Create a pole sign, right? That's a
Get
tactic.
into the juxtaposition.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
And so, well, that's a great point. We should go there. So then the strategy around that could be, if I really want this sign to stand out, I need to add some other features to it, right? So I want to put lighting on it, and I want to make sure that it's got a blue sky behind it, and there's not a lot of other things that are sort of distracting, and I want to make it rotate so that people see the movement, and I'm sort of devising a whole strategy around that sign, right, to create visibility, okay? But there's another layer.
This is probably why there's zoning codes today.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everybody will do the same thing,
yeah.
right? So, so if you are getting a strategic answer from somebody and you're saying, how do I actually get more people into my restaurant? And their idea coming back to you is, put a pole sign, light it, make it rotate, put bright colors on it, make sure it sits against a blue sky so everybody sees it, right? You'll get more people. Okay, yeah. Not universal, obviously, because if you are the French Laundry, that's not going to do you any good. You're in the the middle of Napa Valley. It's not like you got 100,000 cars going by on a highway next to the French Laundry, right? So, absolutely not a universal strategy, and doing a pole sign is not a universal tactic, right? So we all have to understand that there are first principles that are below every single tactic that has worked sometimes and every single strategy that has worked sometimes. And so I was only getting strategic answers and tactical answers that worked in some situations and not in other situations.
I can totally, because we went through, absolutely. There's just so many different things that are case by case scenario.
Yeah.
What works for one person might not work for you, and I think that it's really important that we understand that, like you said, that's a tactic for that individual,
right,
in that individual situation or that specific situation that it made it work, right?
Absolutely. And so the flip side of that is, I'm just going to bring it back to a current example of how we get pushed things, right? There's all sorts of people that are trying to sell stuff to us that come at us on social media and so forth, and they're pushing hard on their tactics and their strategies, but they don't work for most people for hundreds of reasons. Maybe they don't work for the restaurant business, or maybe they don't work for your personality, or maybe they don't work for the skill set that you have or your type of restaurant. And so you're sort of setting yourself up for failure, right? Because you're shooting in the dark. You don't know where the dartboard is exactly. You're just throwing darts when you're reliant only on tactics and strategies to try to stitch together a long-term trajectory in which you can have minimal amounts of hard failure and you need lots of successes to go really far.
Yeah.
Right? You can't stitch together the sort of trajectory our leaders have shooting in the dark on tactics and strategies, because it will take you too long to figure everything out, shooting in the dark like that, to actually get as far as you want to go.
Also get lost in the minutia, trying to figure all that stuff out. You overcomplicate.
You absolutely get lost in the minutia. So a first principle, and let's just take the world that we all know, one first principle of how the world works is we have gravity, right? Yeah. And when you hold up an apple or a glass or anything else, it is going to fall to the ground, right? It's universal.
Yes.
Okay. And what I believe that our restaurant leaders have uncovered, whether they have thought about it in this way or not, but because they are universally practicing in the same ways, and we'll get into that, is they have uncovered the first principles of how restaurants actually bridge that gap from ordinary performance to extraordinary performance. And they are all using these same first principles, whether McDonald's or Noma, to elevate themselves up, right? And so let's go back to the pull sign, right? Yeah. We talked about the tactic. We talked about the strategy. And I'm saying, Eric, under every tactic that's ever worked, sometimes, and under every strategy that's ever worked, sometimes there's a universal principle that works every time.
Yeah. Did you give us an example of a strategy? The tactic was the sign being loud and obnoxious.
No, the tactic was I'm going to create a sign to create visibility.
Yeah.
Okay. And the strategy would be, okay, I'm going to do a multiple things. So strategy is basically a series of tactics put together, right? Tactic is one thing. Okay. And a strategy is I'm going to build a domino or a chain of tactics. And in this case, it was, I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to light it. I'm going to make it great colors. I'm going to position my property in such an extent that it has the maximum blue sky background so that people see it against the blue sky.
Yeah,
right?
But there's a third category we really haven't gotten into yet.
Which are the first principles.
Yes.
Okay. And so what I'm saying is, folks, under every single strategy and tactic that's worked, sometimes there's a universal first principle of restaurants that works every time. Okay. Yeah. And that's what you need to understand, what those first principles are, so that you can apply them as lenses to bring your business to a higher trajectory, right? More consistently with fewer errors and higher probabilities of sort of hitting the sweet spot every time, okay? So what would be a first principle under that tactic or that strategy that we just discussed, right? And that is that when you are more visible, right, people recall you more often, okay? And when they recall you more often, you increase your revenue proportionally to others that don't generate that sort of recall, right? So, in other words, there's a direct line between your visibility in general and the amount of traffic and revenue you generate, okay? And now you can say, how do I take that lens and apply it to all aspects of my business? Because it applies everywhere. And you can say, well, I'm going to make my facade stand out more, right? And I'm going to put a Chick-fil-A style billboard near the off-ramp to the highway. That's visibility. I'm going to figure out how I can become a thought leader so that people like Eric want to talk to me, right? Yeah. And that creates my visibility for my own personal brand, but behind that is my restaurant brand. Or I'm going to publish a book like I did, right? Yep. And I'm going to try to sit on my city council, and I'm going to try to do all these things that
get involved in my community.
that maximize.
Donate.
Yeah, exactly right. Everything that I can do to maximize the visibility of my brand and myself, okay, is going to increase the recall for my brand in the market and is going to lead to more traffic and revenue compared to those that are not as visible as I am.
And this is a universal truth, because you see the same strategy on social media when it comes, all you're trying to do is get impressions. All you're trying to do is remind people that you exist.
Right.
And then once they see that you exist, there's the offer. Right, to get you to come to call to action.
Whatever the hook is.
So it's all the same stuff. It's all about just how many impressions you make. But you get into it in the book, but then there's certain people who are just really good at getting a lot of attention. And that attention they get, the reason why they get to those stratospheric levels of growth is because everybody wants to be, they're just so front of mind.
Well, yeah. So the book tells you how to get that attention, right? And we can go in that in a moment. But what I want to do is, for a second, is step back and show how universal that one principle we discussed is, right?
Yeah.
So I told you out front, I looked at McDonald's to Noma to see what universally connected them.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I said that out loud to somebody. And this guy ran a small restaurant, and he laughed his ass off at me, right? It's like, there's nothing in common. You're an idiot, basically, right? And I'm like, well, I'm not certain if I'm an idiot or not an idiot.
Okay,
This phase.
Is it there's nothing in common? Do you know of Noma? Do you know of McDonald's? Then they have something in common.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so if we think about visibility, right, as our first principle, McDonald's creates visibility in many different ways, right, that are different strategies and tactics, than the way Noma creates visibility, right? They have different strategies and tactics, but they are still trying to maximize their visibility in their own ways, right? And we can talk all we want about those strategies and tactics of one versus the other, right?
Yeah, and I feel like people that are listening to this right now are saying, these freaking a-holes are just telling us the secret to becoming rich in the restaurant industry is get famous, which is a lot easier said than done. But you do get into specific tactics on how,
absolutely,
depending on whether you want to be a McDonald's or a Noma, there's ways to do that.
Yeah. So I guess the important thing for the audience is, I wrote this book not just to tell everybody, okay, that there are all these principles of how to actually bridge your knowledge gap from, that creates ordinary outcomes to the sort of outcomes our leaders get. But actually, there's how our leaders did each of these things are in the book.
Yeah.
Right. And that for me ended up being the bigger jumps, because I could start to easily see the universal approaches to fulfilling these outcomes, right?
Yeah, and we haven't said it yet, and I know where you're heading with this, because I did read the book recently on my flight down here. That even McDonald's and Noma, what they share in common that we haven't said the words yet, is they broke cultural truths.